Poison types are the most abundant type of Pokemon in the Kanto region, for whatever reason. This means that poison types in the region have a lot of competition for what you want to use on your team, both in the context of a playthrough and in the competitive scene. With so many options available, it's only natural to ask the question, which are the worst poison types in Gen 1? And starting us off at number 10, we have the Bulbasaur line. Venusaur, the final member of this line, is a poison grass type Pokemon with pretty okay stats all around. It has 80 in each of its stats besides special, which is a nice solid 100. Remember, in Generation 1, special defense and special attack were one stat, so this helped Venusaur deal special damage and prevented damage from the opponent. It has a good moveset overall, learning good moves like Leech Seed, Razor Leaf, and Sleep Powder at reasonable levels. With decent bulk, speed, and attacking stats, Venusaur is a fine Pokemon at every point in the game, like basically every starter. And as a starter, it's easy to get, so rarity isn't the thing holding the Bulbasaur line back. So if there's nothing quite wrong with the Venusaur line, then why would we be bullying everyone's favorite little grass dinosaur? Well, there aren't that many Pokemon in Gen 1 specifically. And the main reason why Bulbasaur is at number 10 is because every other poison type that is not on this list is noticeably better. Venusaur is by no means a bad Pokemon, but it is worse than things like Gengar, as an example. However, the main reason why Venusaur and its pals land on this list is because of the version-exclusive Pokemon Victreebel. Victreebel, alongside Venusaur, is one of the 3 grass poison types in Generation 1, and is the best by quite a large margin. Victreebel has worse bulk than Venusaur and is slower, but has a much higher attack stat, making it a better offensive mon. However, the main place Victreebel distinguishes itself from the other 2 Pokemon sharing its typing is with its move pool. Not only does Victreebel get access to a lot of the same great moves as Venusaur that we mentioned earlier, but it also gets the incredibly messed up move Wrap. In later generations, Wrap just stops your opponent from switching and deals damage over time for the next few turns. However, in Generation 1, Wrap didn't prevent switching. Instead, for the next 2 to 5 turns that Wrap was being used, the target wouldn't be allowed to attack at all. So if Victreebel is on a slower Pokemon and is able to hit through its 85% accuracy, for the next 2 to 5 turns, your opponent wouldn't be able to do anything but take damage or switch to a new Pokemon. This interaction is so powerful that it gives Victreebel a niche in Smog's competitive format, the main way people play competitive singles for Pokemon. Victreebel is used to come in during the late game after you spread paralysis all over your opponent's team, which cuts the speed of the paralyzed Pokemon to a quarter of its usual value. At that point, it can probably just take out every remaining Pokemon your opponent has. Victreebel's pre-evolution, Bellsprout, can also be found early in the game, on Route 5 in Green/Blue version, which you can access before Misty's Gym. So for playthroughs, Victreebel is essentially just a more frail, harder hitting Venusaur, and in competitive, it has a use case that Venusaur simply doesn't. While this wouldn't last into later generations, Victreebel was a much stronger Pokemon than Venusaur in Generation 1. With all that said, it bears repeating that Venusaur is not a bad Pokemon. It's quite good on playthroughs, and while not in competitive, that's only one axis we're examining Pokemon on this list. This leaves it squarely at the number 10 spot, mostly on the list through a technicality. And at number 9, we have the Nidoran female line. Nidoqueen is a ground poison type with very average stats overall. Its highest stat is its HP at 90, with everything else hovering around 80, which is decent but not amazing because 80 is pretty much the standard. For a fully evolved Pokemon, a base stat of 75 is average for every stat besides speed, where it's a bit higher, at least in Generation 1. Nidoqueen is slightly above average across the board, but it won't be exceptional at taking hits or dealing damage, and you usually want your Pokemon to be exceptionally good at doing at least one thing. Its level up moveset also leaves quite a lot to be desired. The only ground type or poison attack that it learns by level up is Poison Sting, which has a pitiful base power of 15. This means that you won't be able to get the same type attack boost or stab unless you use a limited use TM on it. Stab increases the power of any attack on the same type as its user by 50%, a great source of extra damage. Of course, basically none of this matters in the context of a playthrough. As anyone who's ever seen a Gen 1 speedrun knows, one-hit KO moves have a very weird interaction in Gen 1. Moves like Horn Drill normally have a 30% chance to hit, but when they do, they instantly knock out the Pokemon. This has a neat interaction with the X accuracy item, which in Gen 1 allows you to bypass accuracy checks completely. So every time you click Horn Drill after using an X accuracy on your Nidoqueen, you'll instantly KO your opponent's Pokemon. Sounds broken, right? Well, yeah, and that's a big part of why Nidoking is a very hard carry of choice for Gen 1 speedruns. That and the fact that you can evolve a Nidorino into one as soon as you have a Moonstone, which you can get in Mount Moon right after the first gym. This allows you to get a Pokemon way above the power level it should be for that point in the game, which along with the Horn Drill trick can let you destroy the game. So if Nidoking is so good and Nidoqueen can learn Horn Drill as well, why is Nidoqueen on this list? Well, because of what we mentioned earlier, Nidoqueen's move pool. Nidoking learns Thrash at level 23, a 90 base power normal move, which while usually not amazing, does still do a lot of damage. 80 to 85 base power is the going rate for most moves that don't have a downside, and Thrash's only downside is forcing you to use Thrash for 2 to 3 turns in a row and confusing the user when it ends, which is very manageable and can even be an upside in a speedrun. In speedruns, you want to visit the Pokemon Center as few times as possible, so moves that last multiple turns and can KO multiple Pokemon can let you forego healing for longer. Thrash and Horn Drill combined are used to let Nidoking run through basically the entire game. As Nidoqueen doesn't have access to this Thrash, it can't be used for speedrunning, taking away the Nido's main claim to fame in Gen 1. However, outside of speedrunning, Nidoking still outpaces Queen in almost every way. Outside of the Thrash situation, their movesets are almost identical. The main differences between the two are their stats. Nidoking is faster and hits slightly harder, but for the most part their stats are very similar. They take hits about as well, but since Nidoking is more likely to outspeed an opponent and kill them in one hit, most of the time, it's a better Pokemon in a playthrough. While neither are amazing in Gen 1 competitive, Nidoking is considered an entire tier higher on Smog. All in all, in every place you could use Nidoqueen, Nidoking is just better, and you get access to them at the exact same time and place in every Gen 1 game. If Venasaur is living in Victory Bell Shadow, then Nidoking has all but deleted Nidoqueen from the game. And at number 8, we have the Venonat line. Venomoth is a bug poison type with quite bad HP, attack, and defense. However, with a special and speed stat of 90, Venomoth can outspeed and deal big damage to a lot of Pokemon. It also has a quite good move pool, learning Sleep Powder and Psychic by level up. This was back in the day when Sleep lasted between 1 to 7 turns, which was absolutely backbreaking. Nowadays, Sleep only lasts 1 to 3 turns, and it's still one of the most powerful statuses in the game. Now, Venomoth does have a huge weakness, namely that it doesn't learn any worthwhile poison or bug type moves, in part because of how good bug type attacks just don't exist in Gen 1. This again means you lose out on the 50% boost from Stab, which does hurt it a lot. However, considering how limited poison and bugs are in terms of offensive coverage, this isn't the biggest deal. Psychic coming off of Venomoth's base 90 special still did good damage, and the 1 out of 4 chance to lower an opponent's special makes it one of the best overall attacking moves in the game. Venomoth is, essentially, a much more powerful version of Butterfree. Its main job is to try and outspeed your opponent and sleep them, then let you switch out into another Mon for a free kill, and hit something with its OK special in a pinch. With all that said, Venomoth has a few issues. Venonat is pitifully weak and doesn't evolve until level 31, which is a bit later than you'd want to be for using such a bad Pokemon. You also don't get access to Venonat until round 12 at the earliest, at which point you'll probably already have gone through the first 4 gyms. Venomoth's typing becomes a hindrance here, as it's weakened to both Sabrina and Blaine, and not great into Giovanni or Koga, unless you do some grinding to get its Psybeam for Koga. Even in fights where it's not being hit for super effective damage, Venomoth's poor physical bulk can be a real hindrance as well. Essentially, Venomoth is a Pokemon you'll get access to a bit late into a playthrough that underperforms against several of the major battles you'll be going up against. Its lack of outstanding traits have also left it without too much to do in competitive, being in Smog's Inu or never used here, as it's much worse at pressing Psychic and spamming sleep moves in Pokemon like Exeggutor. Despite having a few good stats and moves, its poor typing and frailty mean that using Venomoth is basically never optimal, though you can definitely get away with it here and there. And at number 7, we have Haunter. Not Gengar to be clear, just Haunter. The Gengar line is a trait evolution, meaning that unlike most Pokemon that evolve by hitting a certain level or using a certain item, you have to trade Haunter to another player and back to evolve it. This poses an issue for many players, as you need a trading partner to do so. Many players won't be able to evolve their Haunter for one reason or another. especially if this is on original hardware where you need to have a link cable to even be able to trade. Considering the special circumstances, the Haunter is being considered for this list despite the existence of Gengar, as many players will be stuck with the middle stage Ghost. Haunter is a Ghost Poison type with abysmal HP, attack, and defense, but a superb special and speed. A speed of 95 makes it one of the faster Pokemons in the generation, and 115 special lets it hit things for big damage. Unfortunately for Haunter, that's about where its good traits end. Its level up moveset is abysmal, learning Lick, Confuse Ray, Nightshade, and Dream Eater, all of which are mostly useless. Nightshade deals set damage, which is awful for a frail Pokemon like Haunter. Dream Eater only works on sleeping Pokemon, which makes it difficult to use. Lick is a weak physical attack, which uses Haunter's paltry 50 attack, and Confuse Ray is just too random to rely on. The only good move it learns by level up is Hypnosis, which has a 60% chance to sleep your opponent. Now, a lot of Pokemon mentioned so far have sleep-inducing moves, so having a fast Pokemon with sleep just isn't good enough. For Haunter to be usable in a playthrough, you'll have to feed it TMs to teach it usable moves. It can learn Psychic and Thunderbolt if you give it those TMs, which will deal decent damage, but any Pokemon that requires TMs to be at all usable in a playthrough is automatically at a big disadvantage. In Generation 1, you can only get these TMs once, so using them on Haunter is a huge cost. Even with these moves, Haunter is going to have a hard time in a lot of fights. Combine its terrible physical bulk with its weakness to ground, and any ground type move has a good chance to one-shot it. So in a playthrough, you have a Pokemon that does good damage, but not amazing damage, is terribly frail, and requires valuable resources to accomplish anything. While not a terrible Pokemon, the cost of using Haunter in your team in Gen 1 isn't worth it if you can't evolve them. Now, Haunter isn't awful and competitive. It's in the underused tier in Smog in Gen 1, which is just below the main tier OU, or Overuse. This is thanks to its, for that tier, great damage output, and its always defensively useful Ghost type, among many other things that make a long story short. This is the best showing of any Pokemon so far, but that notable role in competitive doesn't quite overshadow how difficult it is to use in a playthrough. Overall, you really should skip over getting a Ghost type in Kanto unless you can trade for a Gengar. And at number 6, we have the Ekans line. Arbok is a pure poison type with average to below average stats all around. It has an attack and speed stat of around 80, 69 defense, insert low hanging fruit here, 65 special, and 60 HP. All around, Arbok has bad bulk and completely average attack and speed, which would usually make it quite a bad Pokemon. However, Arbok has a few unique traits that at least save it from being as bad as its stats would imply. Arbok has access to a few moves that other Pokemon did not that gave it a very unique niche. Arbok was the only Pokemon given the move Glare, which would paralyze your opponent and had a 75% accuracy. It also had access to Wrap, just like our friend Victory Bell. This means it could paralyze your opponent and put them into the Wrap Blender, stopping them from ever attacking. This allowed Arbok to work in exactly the same way as Victory Bell, being a late game sweeper in competition, or being used to trap and kill an enemy Pokemon during a playthrough. With all that said, this doesn't completely overcome its other issues. Outside of this powerful synergy, Arbok's stats are so low that it struggles to do meaningful damage in a single turn. Your best level up moves are Bite and Acid, which only have 60 and 40 base power respectively, which isn't hurting much of anything. You need to give it TMs like Earthquake, Hyper Beam, and Body Slam to get anything meaningful done. Coverage options that many Pokemon with far better stat lines and even the same typing have access to. The main upside of the Arbok line is that they're quite easy to get, appearing as early as Route 4, though they are Red exclusive. However, they aren't exactly exceptional stat-wise from this point in the game. They'll be quite average against the main fights at this point in the game, and fall off quickly over time. The utter mediocrity of Arbok is probably best summed up by its placement in Smog's tier system, where it's on the ZU ban list. ZU is the absolute lowest tier for Gen 1, where Pokemon too weak for any other format see play. Arbok is too strong to compete with Pokemon like Tentacool, a not fully evolved poison type, and Parasect, a Pokemon that had 3-4 times weaknesses in this gen, but not good enough to see play in the PU tier, which was named as a joke about how bad the Pokemon in it were. Arbok does have access to some powerful moves alongside a good speed stat to abuse them, but it's so frail and weak that this strategy will only work in extremely specific scenarios. And at number 5, we have the Grimer line. Muck is a pure poison type with a good base 105 HP in attack, below average defense of 75, and poor special and speed of 60 and 50 respectively. This may make Muck seem like quite the bulky Pokemon with its higher than average HP and poison's multiple resistances, but Muck has routinely come up short in this regard. Its defensive spread is deceptively poor, taking big damage from any special attack and decent damage from most physical attacks. This wouldn't be an issue if Muck could do anything back to its foes, but its horrid speed and 105 attack combined to make Muck just not quite do enough to most good Pokemon. Poison types had very few good attack options in Gen 1, so its best stab option is the underwhelming Sludge with only 65 base power. The 40% chance to poison its target isn't enough to offset the math. Muck's Sludge will do so little damage that it will lose the 1v1 in most situations. The sad thing is, Muck does get access to quite a few good coverage moves such as Fire Blast and Thunderbolt, but even with their better base power, Muck's special is so poor that they also underperform in terms of damage. They're worth it for the type coverage, but honestly your Fire Blast and Thunderbolt TMs are better used on other Pokemon in a standard playthrough. The main way it has to take KOs on the physical side are the old reliable Hyper Beam and Explosion, which have their own issues. Sure, Hyper Beam doesn't have to recharge in Gen 1 if it KOs a target, but you're not one-shotting a lot of enemies, so you need to soften them up before going for Hyper Beam. Explosion will often take a one-hit KO, but not always, even with 170 base power and having your opponent's defense. You also only get one Explosion TM per save file, though you can get any number of Hyper Beam TMs from the game corner. The final nail in Muck's coffin is where it and Grimer are found. You can only find them in the Pokemon Mansion all the way on Cinnabar Island, around the time of the 7th gym badge. You've already had the opportunity to get way better poison types by this point, such as every other poison type we've talked about so far. Genuinely, you're better off using any previous spot on this list of a Muck in a playthrough. In competitive, it's also outclassed by every other Pokemon on this list. It's in the ZU tier in Smog, firmly below every other Pokemon we've discussed so far. That's right, it's in the tier that Arbok had to get banned from, and you remember how good of a Pokemon Arbok was in Gen 1. Muck really doesn't have anything to do in Gen 1 besides be fodder for the rocket grunts to use every now and then. And at number 4, we have the Oddish line. Vileplume is a grass poison type with a solid special of 100, average HP, attack and defense of around 80, and a terrible speed stat of 50, just like Muck. It's the version exclusive equivalent of Victory Bell, but while Victory Bell had the decently deadly combination of Wrap and Stun Spore, Vileplume's Learn set leaves a lot to be desired. Its best stab options are Acid and Mega Drain, which both of only have a base power of 40. Not to mention that its Acid would be coming off its lower attack stat, meaning it does even less damage. That's also where most of its options for level up moves end. You get access to the status-inducing powder moves, so you can sleep things with Sleep Powder, but so can half of the other Pokemon on this list, so that's not saving it. You eventually learn Petal Dance and Solar Beam at level 38 and 52, but only if you don't use a stone to evolve it into Vileplume by then, meaning you're stuck with Gloom for most of the game, which is pretty much instantly a no-go. Okay, so the level up moveset isn't a great place, but surely it gets good moves by TMs, right? No. You get a lot of utility moves that other Pokemon do, like Reflect, but you really don't get any useful attacking moves. This combined with its average bulk means that Vileplume can't really do much of anything. This is made even worse by where you get access to the Oddish line. Unlike Bellsprout, which can be found on Route 5, letting you access it before Misty's gym, Oddish isn't found until Route 12 in Red version. This means that you won't have access to it for the Water or Rock gyms, cutting off the 2 gyms where it has an advantage type. Its typing is then bad for most of the later gyms, such as Sabrina and Blaine, with the only good matchup it has left in the game being some of Giovanni's gym team. All of this makes Vileplume a terrible choice for a Gen 1 playthrough. It deals awful damage and will almost always attack second, leaving it take big damage from most opponents and without much unique in terms of a move pool. Its competitive prospects are equally dire. While it is in the PU tier in Smog over Muck and ZU, a big part of that is its ability to spread statuses, something not at all unique to it in the grand scheme of the game. For a good sense of how weak Vileplume is in competitive, Smog's analysis article talks about how it gets completely walled by Ghastly. Yes, Ghastly, the first member of the Gengar line. This less than stellar competitive performance and its utter uselessness in playthroughs easily puts it at this spot on this list. And at number 3, we have the Coughing line. Wheezing is a pure poison type with around 60 HP and speed, around 90 attack and special, and a stellar 120 defense. Wheezing and Muck are almost the same Pokemon, with access to very similar moves and an identical typing. You also get access to them at the same place, with both of them showing up in the Pokemon Mansion. Now, in most generations, Wheezing is considered the stronger Pokemon, but that's flipped on its head in Generation 1. While Wheezing has better defense, its low HP stat means that it takes special hits generally worse than Muck does. Its better defensive spread only really applies against physical attacks, and unfortunately, it doesn't do a lot in return. Both have to rely on moves like Sludge, Hyper Beam, and Explosion for most of their damage output, which Muck outclasses Wheezing in thanks to its much better attack stat. For a good example of this, Wheezing takes more damage from Starmie's Psychic and Blizzard, and its Explosion can never one-hit KO it in return, which is not true of Muck. This is only one example, of course, but it doesn't bode well for Wheezing. The story goes the same way for a lot of places you'd want to use Wheezing. Sludge does poor damage, so you have to rely on coverage like Fire Blast and Thunderbolt that other Pokemon can use much better, as these are both scarce TMs, teaching them to such a weak Pokemon is inadvisable. Its counterpart, Muck, also has much more reliable sources of damage and moves like Body Slam coming off of its decent attack stat. Combine this with its ability to use Acid Armor to shore up its lower physical defense, and Muck can do basically anything Coughing can do in a playthrough. Coughing's competitive prospects are also quite bad, landing once again in Smog's ZU tier. Overall, Coughing and Wheezing are basically just worse versions of already weak Pokemon. And at number 2, we have the Zubat line. Golbat is a poison flying type with a very average stat spread. 75 base HP, 80 attack, 70 defense, 75 special, and 90 speed. While you may say this is fine, being average at everything in Pokemon is usually a very bad spot to be in. In Pokemon, it's usually okay to have 1 or 2 bad stats as long as you can either take hits well, or do something worthwhile while you're on the field, or can do big damage. Being average at everything usually just means you take hits poorly and don't do enough damage in return. This stat spread would make Golbat a pretty weak Pokemon all on its own, but it's made so much worse by its move pool. Golbat does not get a single poison type damaging move in Generation 1. And its only flying type damaging move is Wing Attack at only 35 base power. Essentially, your stab options are non-existent. Okay, that's bad, but other Pokemon on this list are able to make up for that with their coverage moves. Surely Golbat can as well, right? Unfortunately, Golbat basically doesn't get coverage moves either. Its only other damaging moves are Leech Life, which is a terrible base 20 power until the buff in Generation 7 2 decades later, and a variety of middling normal type moves. You're stuck spamming Hyper Beam, which basically every Pokemon gets access to, and Double Edge for damage. Double Edge is only learned by a one-time use TM as well, so you better make sure you really want to use Golbat before teaching it this move. Okay, that's all really bad, but maybe Golbat makes up for it in its utility. Well, not at all. Golbat's best status-inducing moves are Toxic and Confuse Ray, neither of which are worth using. Betting on your opponent to choose to not click damaging moves until they faint due to poison, or hoping they hit themselves in confusion 4 turns in a row, really isn't a winning strategy. This utter uselessness translates into competitive as well, where it's in the ZU tier alongside all the rest of the weak Pokemon we've talked about on this list. Looking at this poor performance, it kind of makes sense why Game Freak introduced the fan favorite Crobat to the line in Generation 2, which basically fixed all the line's problems. Crobat's crazy speed of 130 and overall improved stats allowed to take advantage of the good traits of the line by just always moving first. This, alongside the line getting a much better move pool in Gen 2, allows it to be a pretty good pick for playthroughs from that gen forward. Not to mention Crobat going into the underused tier on Smog in Gen 2, the tier just below the main tier OU. Now, while the Golbat line in Gen 1 feels like some kind of sick joke, there's one poison type with even less going for it in Generation 1. And at number 1, we have the Weedle line. Beedrill is a bug poison type with some really bad stats. It has 65 HP, 80 attack, 40 defense, 45 special, and 75 speed. Essentially, you're only okay doing damage, and you're probably dropping to strong neutral hits. Anything super effective is basically one-hit KOing you no matter what. Now, we do have to acknowledge something about Beedrill here. It reaches its final evolution at level 10, and it's available pretty much immediately. Sure, it can only really compete with not fully evolved Pokemon, but for the most part, in a playthrough, it is competing with not fully evolved Pokemon. At the time you get Beedrill before the gym battle with Brock, its stats are honestly pretty good. Normally this would be enough to keep Beedrill from the number 1 spot on this list. Unfortunately, Beedrill's uses in Generation 1 are extremely limited. It has to rely on terrible attacks like Poison Sting and Fury Attack at low level, which are unfortunately resisted by all of Brock's ground rock-type Pokemon. Against Misty, it does have some uses as it learns Twin Needle at level 20 right in time for the gym, giving it super effective damage against her Starmie. While its special is really bad and takes a good chunk from Bubble Beam, Twin Needle gives it a good chance to take down Starmie with it in that gym battle. However, after Misty, Beedrill's uses drop off a cliff. It doesn't really do much against Lieutenant Surge or Koga, and while it does do good damage against Erika's poison grass types, it's weak to poison itself, and can take big damage in that gym. It's at an active disadvantage against Sabrina, Blaine, and Giovanni as well. Beedrill is really only good for maybe 2 fights in the entire game, and those are fights that other Pokemon do a much better job with. Golbat, for as terrible as it is, also does a good job against Erika, and has immunity to ground that's helpful for Giovanni. Overall, Beedrill has a very bad move pool and bad stats that make it drop off a cliff almost immediately, and honestly, it's not even that good for the fights where it is useful. However, with all that said, Beedrill has one big advantage over Golbat in Gen 1. It has access to the moves Agility and Swords Dance by TM. These boost the speed and attack of a Pokemon by 2 stages, allowing Beedrill to set up against a very weak Pokemon and sweep if it has enough turns. This was almost enough to make me consider if Golbat was worse than Beedrill in Generation 1, even with its far better stats. However, after looking into it, Golbat's use cases are still superior to Beedrill's. Beedrill's terrible defense means that it will never get the chance to set up on anything. After running a few calculations, Golbat still does better against fights like Bruno in the Elite Four that you would consider using either of them for, and its flying type gives it a ground immunity that makes it a lot better into bosses like Giovanni. Overall, Beedrill's uses are so limited and it needs to be replaced on your team so quickly that it's not really worth catching outside of a dex entry.